Good morning or afternoon, wherever you may be watching this. Welcome to the 2020 Employee Water Pollution Training. This is a presentation that's required for us to meet the qualifications of the MS4 permit at the city. I'm going to talk a little bit about just some of the basic principles that face the city when it comes to stormwater and making sure that we're doing our job as a municipal corporation and fulfilling all its requirements. So just a little background on the MS4. Norwalk is one of 44 MS4 communities in the state of Iowa. Also, the 3 state universities in Iowa are MS4 communities. The training that we're going to be doing here, wherever you're watching this, is one of the requirements for us to maintain the permit that is covered under the MS4. It's managed by the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. So MS4 is actually a, not exactly an acronym, but it describes the municipal separate storm sewer system. And those are cities that are identified by the EPA and the Iowa DNR as requiring an MS4 permit. Usually it's dependent upon population and proximity to a metro area. So most of the cities in the Des Moines metro are going to have those, as well as some of the communities like Clinton or Burlington, those size of towns are going to be included in MS4 as well. One of the terms that we're going to be using a lot to save a little time here is BMPs. So when we're talking about BMPs, it's best management practices, which are broadly a set of principles that are employed in any career or job field, but specifically here it's about using good management practices to reduce potential pollution on our local stormwater supply within the city limits. So a few of the things that are required of the MS4 program is we have to do various forms of public outreach on stormwater impacts. We have to do or enable public involvement and participation in things like public meetings or online surveys, these sorts of things. We also need to have ordinances in place that govern what we can do as far as illicit discharges are concerned, managing elimination programs, also what's required on construction sites, post-construction stormwater management, which is a large part of what is covered under the MS4, and then good housekeeping policies on the slide here. That's really just talking about the BMPs that the city has in place in order to make sure that our stormwater systems are functioning well. The water pollution is a pretty self-explanatory thing. I think most people understand what it is and know what it is when they see it. The most common forms of water pollution that we encounter as municipal employees are going to be mostly sedimentary, and then also you have the fertilizers and pesticides that we use in publicly owned land in order to manage mosquito populations, and then of course things like trash and other effluent from construction sites like concrete. One of the ones that isn't quite as obvious is bacteria, and occasionally you hear about E. coli outbreaks or things of that nature that are caused by pet waste, and that's one of the ones that's not quite as visible. You can see kind of the warning signs leading up to bacterial issues in stormwater if you're out and about, but it's just another thing to be mindful of as we think about water pollution in our community.
Elliot, one thing to add, going back to water pollution real quick, that maybe isn't as obvious is under trash. That's not just your normal, what you think of somebody, littering and throwing a wrapper out or something. From a stormwater perspective, and it's not necessarily even pollution, but yard waste and debris and stuff that can wash down into the systems can be problematic too, not just from, not really a pollution standpoint, but from a clogging the system and causing backup standpoints.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a reason that we have ordinances in place about yard waste. So I'm glad you brought that up. And, grass clippings in the gutter and that sort of thing, also no-nos, kind of fall into that trash category as well. Thanks, Luke. So when we're talking about sediments, to go into a little bit more detail, some of the controls that are required on construction sites are silt socks, usually found on the tops of the curbs or just behind the curbs. from the street. Sediment buildup also comes from gravel driveways and temporary construction entrances, and some of the stormwater controls that are required on construction sites, along with silt socks and silt fences, are designed to deter that runoff from carrying those sedimentary pollutants to the street. So as we go through the presentation, a lot of what we're going to be talking about is as municipal employees, it's important that when we're out and about, is to keep an eye out for these things and to report them to myself or to Tony Stravers, who goes and does a lot of the inspections on site. Those are things that we need to nip in the bud and bring to the attention of developers and builders as quickly as we can, especially during the snow melt season and then just the rainier periods of the year. So I've included a few photo examples of some pretty extreme sedimentary issues that have occurred in the community. These are older pictures, and I think we've done a pretty good job at handling these more recently, but these are big no-nos. We have a couple of situations here with massive amounts of sediment buildup. On the picture on the left, we see that's right next to a couple of storm drains. Now, the good news here is that the sediment is downhill from those storm drains, but there's going to be another, storm sewer entry point a little bit further down the road, and one good storm event can wash all that sediment into our sewer system. So big no-no, big thing to avoid. On the right-hand side of the picture, that's a little bit more common of an issue that we experience in the city. We get some of the wetter periods in town. Construction equipment moving across work sites will track over and across curbs occasionally. Relatively common, but still something that we need to know about, be conscious about, report to the proper people in order to get everything cleaned up. These are one of the things that silt sock is designed to help prevent. Obviously, if vehicles are traveling over the curb, that's going to be a bit of a challenging thing to maintain. A couple other things that maybe aren't quite as obvious all the time is issues with concrete washouts. So what I've provided here in the slide are just some examples of what a concrete washout might look like. In the city of Norwalk, we tend to see the bagged ones on the left more often, but occasionally we do have the example on the right, which is, I believe it's a cardboard concrete washout with a rather thick plastic liner. And essentially, those are designed for the concrete pouring equipment to wash out. That's why it's called a concrete washout. And it's important that those things are contained and are free of spillage, whether that's onto the public streets, sidewalks, lawns, etc. So that's a thing that we also are being cognizant of when going out and about in the community. As far as fertilizers and pesticides are concerned, those are pretty hazardous materials to be working with if they are unintentionally directed into a storm water situation. Thankfully, in the city, from the municipal side, we don't do a large amount of fertilizer and pesticide application compared to the size of the community, but it is something that we have to be cognizant of, and we do have a licensed fertilizer pesticide applicator on staff in Parks and Rec, Mr. Dakota Springer. So that is a thing that we have to make known to the DNR as well and be conscious of if we're ever in a situation where we are applying fertilizers and pesticides. I believe right now we're mostly doing that under contract, but good stormwater management principle all the same. And just kind of to run through the bullet point there, the biggest issue with fertilizer and pesticide, phosphorus. Phosphorus is by far I guess I couldn't say that authoritatively, but it's one of the rudimentary elements that always comes up when we're talking about water pollution in water bodies. It always navigates its way through storm sewer systems into pond streams and lakes, and it can have a pretty devastating impact on those water bodies. Expanding a little bit more on trash, Luke brought up a little bit more detail on this earlier. Primarily with trash, we have two types in the city of Norwalk that we watch out for. One's the lawn debris, so your leaves, your grass, even sticks and twigs, all of that stuff. Trying to keep that out of the storm system just to keep it from getting clogged, if nothing else. but also the breakdown of those organic compounds can have adverse effects on environments depending on where they happen and how voluminous they might be. Predominantly in the city of Norwalk, with as much construction as we have going on, trash and debris really needs to be isolated into dumpsters and the appropriate disposal containers. A lot of trash from construction sites can be lightweight, and during windier times of year can be blown around and these sorts of things. Ideal not to have those things wind up in the stormwater system. Pretty obvious statement, but sometimes trash and debris isn't always obvious. Sure, there's the candy wrapper, chip bag type of debris and trash. With construction, it's a lot of scrap wood, scrap hardware, screws, bolts, these sorts of things, even tools that get left behind unintentionally. You'd be surprised what a good flowing stream during a strong storm event could carry down a road. So those are things that we're trying to look out for. But trash, another thing that doesn't really fit into the trash category directly, but portable toilets, same thing. Just being smart about the placement of those. And some job sites are big enough that they have got porta potties, and if we notice that those are in an inappropriate place, that's a thing to be got to report, be cognizant of, and get them moved into the right place. Right now in the city, when I was collecting photos to provide examples here, we actually have done really well on construction debris and trash, and I wasn't able to find anything too garish. But here's some examples just from other communities in the Midwest of what a really bad trash situation might look like. In the top left picture, that's on a rural cross section, not quite as comparable to the city of Norwalk. In the bottom right, though, this is clearly the result of somebody doing a renovation project in their house. That is very, very much inappropriately contained trash. Those are the sorts of things that we need to be looking out for on construction sites and reported as needed. Bacteria, I mentioned before, E. coli. I feel like most people watching this presentation could probably recall a time when they'd heard about an E. coli outbreak in some natural water source or stream. A lot of that is due to fecal matter from pet waste. And I think one of the things I noted in our MS4 report this time around is that Parks and Rec has done a really good job of getting the bag dispensaries along our trails and in our park system, help make pet waste easier to manage for our citizenry. It's important as just citizens in general, but of course as municipal employees, to manage pet waste and be responsible with how we handle that sort of thing. And also, of course, reminding people and calling them out when you see them, if you see somebody leave pet waste behind. I've done it on accident before, and it's not a good feeling to be called out, and it's a good reminder when sort of thing happens. So public actions, one of the things that they emphasize in the MS4 report is finding alternative strategies to managing stormwater in a passive way and in an active way. I've got a couple examples of those here. Encouraging people, if they want to, explore rainscaping to do that. It's pretty surprising how big of an impact a simple rain garden of just 100 or 200 square feet can have on a local stormwater situation. Those sorts of installations are what help the community become resilient to flash flooding during the extreme periods like we saw a couple summers ago. And that's something the city's trying to encourage, hopefully through some additional grant programs coming up in the next year or so. And then of course on the right here, included some photos of folks helping clean up the streetscape, whether that's on the street side of it or behind the curb. All of it plays into how our local storm water system functions properly and helping keep it clean. So listed out a few of those things here. Of course, I've been harping on it a few times in the presentation: yard clippings, leaves, and other debris. Keeping an eye on the adjacent street in your property. Anything that can be done to help keep those clean, absolutely make the effort to do it. Containing leaks from vehicles and driveways, that's more of like a chemical contaminant similar to the pesticides and fertilizers. Obviously oil is a little bit different. A lot of people like to do work in their garage or in their driveways on vehicles, and driveways tend to slope towards the street. So being cognizant of where any leaks might go and minimizing those as best as we can. Of course, chemicals and pesticides on private property, same principles apply to individual homeowners as they do to the city. And then another thing that some people don't think about is where you wash your car. So something that the Iowa DNR takes into strong consideration and recommending people strategies is taking your vehicle to a car wash instead of washing it in your driveway. Most car washes, I understand, have pretty strict regulations about the infrastructure underneath them. So when a car is washed, all of that gunk and debris is collected in a pretty robust collection system and cleaned out when necessary. So just another thing to be thinking about and how you can have a positive effect as a member of the public. A couple other things that we can add to this are extensions on downspouts, helps the stormwater situation directly around your home, making sure the foundation is going to be intact for a long time. And then rainscaping ideas. We have a wealth of flyers and informational pamphlets about ways to rainscape your property. It's a very trendy word in home maintenance these days. So a simple Google will flood you with a litany of ideas for how you can rainscape your property and help on a small scale with the grand scheme of our stormwater system. A few examples of rainscaping that aren't landscape related would be rain barrels or cisterns. One of the more common examples of stormwater management on the private property level. I think the city is going to be rolling out a program of some sort, hopefully pretty soon, to enable rain barrel acquisition to be a little easier. And cisterns are a little bit more challenging. Those typically the difference is a rain barrel is anywhere from 50 to 100 gallons in general. Cisterns tend to run into these several hundred gallons in volume. Sometimes they're buried. If you have the ability to make the capital expenditure to become self-sufficient on rainwater alone and have the purification system installed, I'd highly recommend burying a cistern in your front yard. Just be prepared for a pretty extensive bill and be careful of your service lines. But that's a creative way to manage stormwater and in the long run, save a little bit money on your water bill. Rainscaping also comes in the form of pavements, and something the city is trying to experiment with a bit more is integrating permeable paving in our public projects. That's a thing that's been a little bit slow taking off, but something we're very cognizant of when exploring plans for repaving areas of public property that need to be repaved, or new paving in new park facilities or recreational facilities, etc. So that's pretty much all that I had to say. Luke, do you have anything to add before we close off here?
Not particularly. Do you just want to hit on maybe, I know there's a lot of this was just educational side, but are there things from like a staff perspective that we should be looking at doing, just each in our own job? A couple things that came to my mind through would be one, in community development, we have staff that deals with stormwater complaints and make sure that people complies to things, but we're only a few set of eyes. So the more eyes that are out looking for these things and understanding that something might be a problem, certainly call us if you see something. The other things would just be, trying to help maintain things by, not having trash and things out and about. So if you see some trash, pick it up. If, you're out and about on a job site doing something, obviously being aware of what you're leaving behind as well. So there's just a few things that we as staff, I think, can do to try to have a positive impact on stormwater. I don't know if you had anything else you'd like to add to that.
No, I would just echo you. I'd say that the biggest takeaway just from this presentation is, the friendly reminder about things we can do in our community to keep an eye out on things and report them as necessary. I'm not inviting everybody to just inundate me and Tony with reports about every little thing in the community. Obviously, exercise a little bit of discretion, but yeah, just be the eyes and the ears. That's what we're asked to do as civil servants. So with that, thanks for sitting through the presentation here. This is going to check one of the boxes for our MS4 permit maintenance. If you would please respond to the email that I sent with the invitation to view, or just shoot me an email confirming that you watched it. Also, please report that to your department head, because I'm going to be not only tabulating the email responses I get, but also just getting numbers from them just as verification. So thanks for watching, and look forward to your reports and feedback.